Okay. I'm Victoria Brown. I'm the chair for this conference, and I would like to introduce to you Allison Spargo. She has it was a school counselor during COVID, and she's going to share with us a little bit about what it was like to be in a K-12 elementary school during COVID. Allison, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I have just a picture change. Let me see if I can knock some of that out. So my name is Allison Spargo, and I have a doctoral degree in counselor education, which means I'm a professor of counseling. And in addition to that, I am a licensed professional counselor and a certified school counselor here in the state of Georgia. And during the time of COVID, I was happily placed in a independent school, a small independent school, which means private in some language, working mostly with students who had uniquenesses such as autism spectrum, significant ADHD, and these were students who had either school choice wavered or elected to be in this private entity to better support their social, emotional, and educational learning. And so the grades were grades 4 through 12, although there was an after graduate assistance program as well. So for students who completed, graduated, and just wanted to retain the social aspect of their lives, maybe taking college classes in addition to working. And so they would be able to come back to the campus to learn amongst a comfortable space.
Wow, that sounds like a good experience that you can share with us today. Definitely appreciate you doing this.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some of the challenges that the students experienced and that you experienced as a counselor?
Yeah. So for speaking, you want me to kind of bracket it in the COVID era? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes,
Okay.
for right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've got some vivid memories around when the outbreak first occurred, if you will. And so, the fear that students had around getting sick. And then, there were some very vivid points of now everybody go home, right? And so the fear that elicited amongst the staff and the student body and parents saying, wait, it's a private entity and now you're sending my students home for how long, we don't know. So there was honestly a lot of uncertainty and fear, which I think is a common experience at that time, but these students were unique again in that they dealt with some exceptionalities. Their learning processes, their emotional regulation, those types of things were really different. And so a big pivot from a routine into everybody go home, live with people who, you don't spend all this time with, learn online. Those were all really, really big challenges that this particular population dealt with. I think one of the parts that stands out for me was strategizing how to support the social emotional needs from a school counseling perspective while managing FERPA in a setting where, I can't maintain confidentiality anymore because we're all home with our family, myself included. And so those were just some of the really big challenges, like strategizing how to do all of that were some of the biggest pieces of, this shift that we all encountered around that time.
A lot of news articles have come out and they've said that the students really were struggling with a sense of isolation and needing a lot more social and emotional support during this period. Did you have a similar experience?
Yes. I don't know if it was more or just the absolute withdrawal of a social structure was kind of the catalyst of a lot of stress, right? So these students had friend groups. And again, the routine is really essential for all students of all ages, but for students who have these uniquenesses, the routine was something that gave them comfort and rhythm and, that baseline of support. And so when COVID happened and we were all home, parents don't engage in the same way that teachers do. And there's not a friend for you to turn to if you need a break. And so it was really challenging for these people to lose their whole social structure as they knew it. And so that was one of the goals that we had as a counseling team, is to find ways to keep that social structure. And so I can talk about some of the ways that we did that if you'd like us to.
Definitely. Yeah, that's my next question. You were reading my mind.
So I will say we had a fantastic counseling team and a lot of really great teachers who were invested in their students, doing the best that we could, as we all were, right? And so it was really fluid, especially the first couple of weeks when we're like, wait, what are we doing? But some of the things that we did were just a lunch club. And so many of our students were enrolled. And let me also just say, like, all of our students, when they left, were given tablets of some kind. So a Surface or, whatever electronics they needed to stay engaged. And our classroom structure was still live and synchronous. And so what that meant is you would enroll in a Google Classroom for math. And then when math was over, you would take another Google link and go to science. And so you would maneuver through your day virtually as though you would have through a school day. So we created a lunchroom for our students, a social place where they could just go and hang out and be with their friends. If they wanted a separate lunchroom, we could assign another counselor and say, you know what, you four want to go and have lunch by yourself as though it was a table for just you, off you go. And so teachers were able to do that. We had a before school activity center where counselors would be available, or faculty would be available to play a game, tic-tac-toe. We were doing all kinds of random things. We would color by numbers. We would have yoga in the morning, and it really just depended on kind of what the teachers could bring, what the school counselors could bring, and maybe what we interpreted as the needs of the students at the time. And in addition to that, we just helped in all kinds of ways. And so the nature of the school was that if there was a social, emotional, or academic or school counseling need during the school day, live or even virtually, students were able to meet with their school counselors. So we found a way to set that up for our students in a virtual setting using the Google Classroom platform, where a student could live text a counselor who was available all throughout the day, and then they would be sent a private link that nobody would have access to. They could go to that private link and have a one-on-one with the school counselor if necessary. And then that link was disabled so that nobody would have access to that room again.
Wow. So it sounds like you did a lot of building in some really great engaging opportunities. Did the students take advantage of that?
Oh, yes. At the onset, it was slow moving because they were all, trying to find their link for math class and trying to figure out how to manage their day, how to get dressed to go to school when you're not going to school. So there were more essential priorities at the beginning, but then once they got their rhythm under them again, absolutely, we had more and more students showing up for our lunches, more students asking for a game day. And so they were again speaking their needs in a way that they had done in a live session using these virtual platforms. So yeah, for sure.
Wow, that's great. That's great to hear that they engaged. So it wasn't just planning it, and they actually really wanted to do that. Some of the schools reported, and I would say your experience in your independent school probably was not exactly the same as what was happening in the public schools, but the one of the things I do think I see I've also seen in the news is that grades were not as good, and that reading and math scores fell off. Do you feel like that happened at your school?
Yes and no. So there are some students who thrive with the independence that COVID allowed. And so you might not have seen a drop in the scores necessarily, but they were able to do it at a pace that was more fluid for themselves. And some students, again, would just flourish. And so they would finish their day's work within an hour or two, if that was what they could do. Whereas other students, it became more of a languish opportunity. And so without the structure of you have to finish this before you move to your next class and it will be collected, then yes, the scores could decrease. But I think too, a pivot from observing a student learn, whereas there's less opportunity for that. Even if I've got the camera on, I'm not sure if you're actually doing your work or if you're not. And so, there's a lot of challenge to overcome in a classroom as well. And again, that's been a minute, so I'm trying to reflect on where there are decreases in the academic performance. I can't 100% say one way or another. I guess I just don't have the metrics to know.
That's fine. I think too, it kind of depended on where you were in which localities. Because I know in Alabama, they didn't have the technical tools in order to really implement it because it's very rural here. There's no guarantee you would have internet connection in the mountains. And I'm assuming Georgia would be very similar. So those schools had to go back in some way, shape, or form very quickly.
Yeah.
So I would say that they probably were less impacted than other schools that maybe were in urban communities where they were were locked down for a longer period of time. What was that? Was that the situation maybe at your school?
So we're just north of Atlanta, so I would align us more with the urban side of things. Connectivity was not a struggle necessarily for us, and like I said, all of the students had a device with them, and so access I don't think was a struggle. I think it was more so finding the flow, finding the routine, and then also the motivation to do so when it's different, it's new,
Right.
and it's scary.
So do you think as you were, again, you were in a more of a private setting versus a public setting. So were you able to return to school faster?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So we were out for the spring. I know March 13th was the day. And so the next school year, that school was back in session.
We're back in session.
And actually, so I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I'm in Georgia. I personally live in Cherokee County, Georgia, which again was one of the very few school districts that went back the next year. And so even as like a mom and a parent of my own children, observing that K-12 in a more public setting, I think there were probably fewer implications in the social emotional health of students because of the return to school.
Yes, I think you were probably very again some good insight there. As you were going through this experience, what kind of things do you feel like you learned from being online? What are some best practices that you would recommend to someone who might be in an online school situation again?
So part of what I'd like to say here is, as a school counselor and as an educator in that time, we already had a program in place that was oriented towards social emotional learning. It was an online platform, and I can share more with you about it now. But it was already in place, similar to like the online curriculum that you guys probably already use if an online university or online entity. But having that in place allowed students to more easily pivot when the world stopped turning, if you will, because they knew this is what online social emotional can look like. And so, for instance, the program that I was using at the time for the social emotional side of things was called GPS for Success. It's a free organization, a free curriculum for schools. And so to have that in place so that when students did go to home learning, we were able to still use consistent language because it was already in place in the school setting using a virtual online platform. So I think having that consistency was really essential for those students at that time.
Well, we have some new people who are coming in, and we are just having a conversation with Allison Spargo. And if you could reintroduce yourself real quick so they would know a little more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned that I have a doctoral degree in counselor education, which means that I train counselors how to be counselors. I train mental health counselors and school counselors how to do that. I'm based in Georgia, just north of Atlanta, and my experience during during the K-12 COVID era was at an independent school, grades 4 through 12, dealing with what are considered exceptional students on the autism spectrum, significant ADHD, really things that were a challenging obstacle in a more traditional setting. So those are just some of the, oh, thank you.
I had to
Yeah,
look that
that's
up because it sounded so awesome. Like I didn't know that even existed for students in K-12 in an online environment. So I'm just like, oh, wow, that sounds really cool. I want to look that up.
And that's totally it. And I don't know if it's okay to say that, but since COVID happened and I moved back into higher education, I still work with that group, the GPS for Success, as an implementation specialist.
Mhm.
And what that means is when a school is curious about it, I'm the one who helps them walk through and talk through the logistics of how this can look for your particular school, whether it's an online or on ground. So if you're interested in knowing more.
Yes, I
Yeah.
think we are very interested in learning more about a platform that really supports social emotional K-12. I definitely am very interested. So
Yeah.
if you could share, we would appreciate it.
Oh, sure. So the GPS for Success program is grounded in Castle's social emotional learning. And it is, I found it pretty easy to implement as a school counselor, and most schools do. It is grounded in 5 core principles, and the terms are vision. What is it that you want for your life? Purpose. Why do you want that for your life? Like, what are the values that drive that for yourself? The mission of how are we going to achieve that? The team, who do we need to surround ourselves with or not be near to get us towards that life goal that we've assigned for ourselves? And then the commitment piece related to how do we stay focused when things get tough? And so the premise is if students are able to identify a goal and it's age appropriate. So 3rd graders are going to want to be maybe a YouTube star. I don't know. 12th graders might also want to be a YouTube star, right? Somewhere in between there, we might get some professional athletes. We might get some manga artists. We might get, I don't know, stay-at-home parents, a range, right? So it's a self-driven goal. But our job as educators across the board, school counselors or educators, would be to remind students of those goals when they get stuck or troubled. And so, in a math class, I've overheard math teachers saying, Cadence, what's your goal? And how is working this math problem going to get you closer to that? And it refocuses them, right?
I'm going to use that with my daughter who's 14, Allison. Like like what you're telling me right now. I'm like, I can use this as soon as I get home later today.
Yeah,
So
I mean, I use it with my own kids because if somebody has their own goal, they're going to work towards it. Whereas if I tell you to go do your homework, then now we're set up into a power struggle where you can say no. And what am I going to do about that? But if I say, doing your homework might help you get to be one of my sons wants to be a pilot in the Air Force. I'm like, doing your math homework might get you there a little bit easier. Then that reminds him of his own goals. And there's less resistance around that. So it's a really great program because it's age appropriate and it uses language that can really help that. And so if you can imagine, like we'd started that program before COVID hit. And so when COVID did close the school, then we were able to remind students like, okay, I know you don't feel like turning your camera on. I know you feel like hanging out with a school counselor, and this is really hard, but you said that your teammates are so-and-so and so-and-so. What class are they in? Oh, they're in your math class? Let's go to your math class and then virtually attend that math class. And so it's got all of these different pieces that help, I don't know, form a sensitive bubble around our students so that they get to what they want without the power struggles that you might encounter in other places. So if you're curious to know more, let me know. I'm happy to help. Like I said, it's free. The programming is free. And it's age appropriate, middle school, high school.
Is it inside of, are you familiar with the website? Is it inside of like the resource center on?
So the program itself is not in the website, in the resource center, because there is a aspect of fidelity to the training of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's evidence-based. We work with our partners at William and Mary to run all of our data around us.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there is a train the trainer type model, so that if a school is interested, then they get to hang out with me. I train them on how to implement it for their particular school. So there's fidelity around the program. And And then through that process, access to the programming happens.
Very cool.
And so if a student was struggling socially, emotionally, was counseling services available to them then, or?
Yes. My answer is yes, right? So as an educator, I'm going to just like hop in and say there's almost like a matrix of 3x3 that school counselors operate in. We look at the whole school, we look at smaller groups, and we look at individual needs. And for that, we look at social emotional, and we look at academic, and we look at college or career readiness. And so those three things overlap. If a student had a need that fit in that matrix, then yes, we had a FERPA compliant way to communicate individually with students or in small groups. If there was something that was more mental health related, then that is beyond the scope of what is typical to school counselors. And so, a base of referrals would be given at that time.
Okay, so you used a referral system to someone to help with those situations. So, yeah, I have to admit, most of this was very personal to me. I ended up in my granddaughter developed social emotional needs when she was isolated.
Mm-hmm. I will say, as a professional counselor, like I'm not working in the schools at this time, but I still see clients, and the ripple effect is really visible from my end, kind of like you were saying, Vicki, as far as like, there's a different fear among students and kids than there was before. A fear of big crowds, a fear of getting sick, a fear of a cough or a sneeze. And I don't think that's specific to children, but I think their worldview shifted differently than adults might have. And, we see, this might be off topic because it's not COVID specific, but there's a different response to grief than there was, because there was such a loss. Like specific to New Jersey, they're requiring schools and school counselors to have a grief response unit because they had significant numbers of death, right?
Yes,
So I think that there's a lot of advocacy and a lot of shift from our response to COVID, which is amazing. I'm curious to see how it will continue, because there has been a change in the topics that bring kids to counseling nowadays is different than it was before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for our granddaughter, it was the total. She lost her entire support group, and I ended up having to be that social and emotional backup.
Yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, it is really, really tough. It was very tough for her. So those are kind of the questions I had. Is do either of you have other questions you might want to ask our guest speaker today?
I see Florence has her "I'm away" coffee cup up, so when she comes back, she might have some.
Well, I have a question actually, and that's granted, given constraints of a statewide school system that may not be interested in this sort of program based on changes in curriculum that are happening, politics and all that fun stuff. What would you recommend for individual teachers or parents who maybe didn't have access to a whole program like that?
That is a good question.
Because I don't, you could probably see where I'm getting with that question, but
Well, the word social emotional has a political twinge to it,
sure, yeah,
right? And so I use that language because it's couched in some of those premises, theories, I guess. But really, I consider it as a prevention program, right? And that's how it's in some ways marketed as. It's a prevention program that uses those intrinsic motivators and insights to then prevent unhealthy or antisocial type behaviors, right? Because if I can remind a student, like I'm going to use my own son, you want to be a pilot, right? We need to hang out with people who want same goals. We want to hang out with people who are going to help you get there. And we want to engage in behaviors that are going to help you get there. And when you make a misstep, that's okay, but using drugs isn't going to get you there. Being truant isn't going to get you there. Skipping sports and doing things like that, that's not going to get you there either. And so just to use the tools that are in this program as a prevention program, that could be a different way to just shift the language to something that's more palatable
Yeah.
and less politically charged.
That's awesome. I love that. And that kind of drew me into a separate question, I think.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen this utilized in higher ed? And do you have any tips on what that might look like?
So it has been used in higher ed. This is outside my purview, so I can speak a little bit to it.
Well, that's okay. I know it's K-12, but I wanted to ask just because,
Only because
I'm in higher ed.
I interact with the K-12 side of it, but I do know that it has been like a college class. The GPS for Success has been a accredited college class in the past, a full 15-week type semester. Jen Kramer is the person who is, the head of this. She's the one who signed me up to be the speaker here today. So I can ask her more specifically around that. And I'm not sure, Charlotte, if it's on the website or not, like if there's a GPS for something that looks different.
Not that's immediately evident to me. I've kind of dug around it. Well, I thought thoroughly, but I would love to get in contact with her because we do have something similar, with goal setting, here at my university specifically. But as an instructional designer, who has influence over several different departments. And the one thing I always notice about that success course for undergrads is you only get that course if you go to freshman year at UCF. So if you started at a 2-year college, or if you, finished a lot of your prereqs, AP classes or did dual enrollment, you don't get that class. So I feel like that's a really good orientation that could be provided. Anyway.
Absolutely. Well, if you want to, you're welcome to drop your email in a chat, and then I can email both you and
Thank
Jen
you.
and just connect you or connect me into it. That'd be fine.
That sounds awesome.
I think too, this program is used in all sorts of really cool places. I'm the type of person who I'm always curious, how things unfold. And so we worked with a lot of entities that weren't really on my radar. I'm sorry, I'm copying and pasting your email before the chat goes away. And so one of the places when people ask me, where do you see this going next? One of the places I see the GPS for Success program going next is on a Connections Academy or an online schooling virtual academy, if that happens, as part of their school counseling or social emotional prevention curriculum, right? And so I think it would be cool and neat to offer that type of programming for students K-12 across the board as part of something that they can grow with, because they don't necessarily have someone talking to them about what do you want to do with your life from a value side of things. Is it money that you're driven by? Is it fame or success or influence? Do you want to give back? If parents aren't having that conversation, there's really not a tangible educational place for it, but it's really essential. And so I would really love to see it go there if we can get there next. That's one of my goals for the program.
Yes, I think you're right, Charlotte, because I know here at FAU, those courses are for freshmen who probably are coming in at risk anyway. So we have special tracks for those students, and that they would definitely have a class of some kind if they're in the at-risk category. So I can really see that being part of what we do here at the higher ed as well.
But everybody needs it. I would definitely argue that it could be helpful for everyone, even as a professional development for faculty, I mean, certainly not to that degree, because you would hope that somebody who is working, has examined that, but it's easy to forget. It's easy to lose sight of things. So.
Well,
Charlotte, you mentioned that. I know that there is a side arm of this organization that does training for faculty, law enforcement, military, school teachers. So I've got your email. I'll get you hooked up, because there is an arm that does training for organizations like that.
I'm going to see if I can bring someone else in. Daniel Suarez, are you able to talk? He is also in K-12, so maybe we can put him on.
I am. Let me get the room quiet for a second. Give me one second. 1 minute.
Okay, we'll give you that 1 minute. He must be in classes. No, he's also, I believe, in a private school, and he teaches multimedia development to his students, including video editing, multimedia development. And it'd be interesting to hear from him his experiences. Well, I mean, particularly teaching those types of programs in an online environment, I think would be really valuable for us to understand here as part of this panel. So we'll make him an impromptu panel member when he comes back. How's that? We'll let you off the hook, Allison, for a little bit. Does anybody else have any other questions that they might be interested in hearing more about from our K-12 specialists?
I just wanted to say thank you so much for sharing the GPS for Success information. It's just so interesting. And like Charlotte was saying, I think just thinking about how that just applies to so many levels. And yeah, I've got a friend who is a high school counselor, so I'm going to be asking her if she uses that locally here as well.
Yeah, I was thinking, I haven't seen a lot of literature on having a social emotional platform for K-12. So that I think this is really eye-opening for me to hear that this is available.
So can I ask, because like, I don't know if you guys will even know the answer, but from a virtual platform perspective, is there a counseling, social emotional prevention, like whatever the language is that you want to use it, like, does that exist for virtual online learners? You know?
There is one that I do know of that's being used at the university level. It's called U. And they have like an interface where like you can set up some goals and do that kind of thing, I believe. And then they gauge your emotions, or they ask you questions, and then they come in and they'll maybe give you some prompts or, you know, things to help, you know, build some encouragement. So I think that's the closest I've seen. It seems like it's really successful. So now that Daniel can join us, I did introduce you while you were gone. While you were gone.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
fine.
it's class time, and my top 8th graders are coming in. They're going into projects. Basically, right now, the class I'm teaching now is digital design. So they're actually making an apocalyptic ending. So they're actually working on Adobe Premiere, and they're designing it, and they're actually editing. Berkeley is making the music. Maritza, she's actually the actress. So we recorded her, and then she's actually composing her, and Vanya is doing the background. So it's kind of cool class. So I enjoy it. So they're here, but they're quiet. So don't go for it. So ask me questions.
Okay, well, I would like to hear a little bit, because that sounds like a pretty challenging class to teach online. So how did you manage that during COVID?
During COVID, what happened was we were able to do video, and a lot of the students, because the classes were not as big but they were smaller, we were able to do individual groups. So in Google Meets, we had Hastings separate them to different groups. So while they're in different groups, they can still work on the same project. Adobe Premiere allows you to do that. So as WeVideo and other software allows you to do the video editing and different projects that you can do collaboratively. At the same time, on a different laptop or a different screen, you can still be able to communicate and get the information that you need to get done. You do need students that are go-getters, and it is what I'm being honest. And then the students that are not, it's hard. Students with disabilities, it's harder. And I myself have a learning disability, so I know I can speak for myself how difficult that could be. So, but yes, it can be harder for students who have different situations mentally.
Wow. So then, so it sounds like you were able to pivot, but you are using some pretty high-end software there. So how did you get students access to that?
It's actually interesting. It's only basically $10 for each student with Adobe's Education Cloud. It's really, I wish they did that for the instructional design. So then the students, so basically the price that should have been that's usually $40 a month, it's only $10 for almost the whole year. And the kids are able to use high-end computers. Let's have Maritza, can you come in to the call? Let me see if I can take out my background for 1 second and see if I can take this background out. I don't know if I can.
Is it gonna be okay that she's on camera and being recorded?
She can, do you mind being recorded? I don't mind. She doesn't mind. Okay. Bring your laptop over. She doesn't mind. She has to mind my lunch.
Okay.
You show them the laptop. So it's an HP laptop. It has a game engine design. So the students, their background kind of messes it up, but yeah. But the students are able to use these computers by the district. And it's great. And we're using it. We're putting it through to the mileage as much as we can.
Wow. So it's helpful to have like very high-end laptops that you could then hand out to the students.
Correct. And they keep them for all 3 years. They're with me.
Yeah. Oh, so that's great. Because then they have something and it's mobile and you can, I mean, that allows you to pivot very easily.
I rather enjoy this than a desktop, because the desktops, yeah, this is a lot better. The laptops, I mean, at first students have to learn to take care of them because they are in middle school, but in the end, it's better to have a laptop, especially at this age.
Wow. Does anybody have any questions for Daniel? Well, thank you so much for popping in and helping us out.
You're welcome. Take care, guys.
Yeah. Unless somebody else has other questions, I do not. And I know that Allison said she had children coming fairly soon. So if there's not any other questions, we can actually close the session.
Just a comment to say thank you for sharing about this platform and for sharing about the U. This is something that we can definitely look into as students struggle with what they need to do.
Yes, and U is, I wish I knew more about it. It's been a few years since I've heard, so I went to a conference and they are definitely building a good base of different universities that are now using it. So I think it is a good platform for universities. And I love hearing about the K-12 platform.
Well, if
Right.
anyone wants to know more about really what I've spoken about, any aspect of it, not just the GPS program, but like, maneuvering and encouraging motivation, any of those types of things, I'll drop down the chat. Well, I can put mine in the chat and then you can email me if you want to.
That works. That'll be perfect. That way, if those who might be watching a recording later can also reach out to you.
Absolutely. And so that is my email. If you care to call me, I'm answer my phone. So you can give me a call. If you've got questions or concerns, want to know more, just let me know. I'm happy to talk. Thank you, Florence.
All right. Well, thank you for being so willing to do that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you all for attending, and I hope to see you again in a little bit.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.